Opponents of the state's aerial moss spraying program are celebrating a victory tonight. Officials today abandoned their plans to spray pheromones in urban areas. Instead, they plan to use another method to kill off the light brown apple moth.
This is a pretty dramatic about-face for state officials. After telling the public for months that this spraying program was absolutely necessary, suddenly it seems it's not so urgent after all.
It's the news that countless Bay Area residents wanted to hear, and it came in a conference call this afternoon.
At this point, I can say that we are not, and I'll repeat that we are not planning to be up with an aerial application of pheromones.
After thousands of complaints, state and federal agriculture officials decided not to spray the controversial chemical over urban areas to battle the light brown apple moth.
What does this change actually mean? What is it that's happened? Well, really all that's happened is that the CDFA has decided for now not to spray chemicals from airplanes over urban areas. That's not in writing yet. I believe they're not going to for now, but this is no legal agreement yet. And so first of all, I just want to emphasize that I think this is huge. And I think the biggest thing about it, besides the fact that we're not going to be sprayed from airplanes with these toxic chemicals, is that we did this. In the period of 6 or 7 months, we went from nothing to people running around trying to figure out what we could do, to organizing ourselves, to self-created organizations, and really doing the research in the environment, in the medical, in the legal, in the economic, in every area, and figuring out what it took for us to get along well enough and organize ourselves and not be too redundant and find out what was really going on and then publicize that as broadly as we could. And if you stop to look at that, with essentially no money, citizens stopped Bush, Homeland Security, the USDA, the CDFA, and Schwarzenegger. That's pretty good. And by no means is this over. The key thing that I recommend that we take away from this is that we are not helpless. That organized people are more powerful than organized money. It's more powerful than the military. It's more powerful than anything, is people organized around the truth. And that's why we got millions of dollars of free publicity, is because it was true. What we were discovering about the ill effects on people's health, about the impacts on the economy, about what was happening in the environment, was true. So people could resonate with it, and the newspapers wanted to carry it, the TVs wanted to cover it, the radio stations wanted to have talk shows on it, because it was a dynamic issue, and the people were standing up for our safety and what we knew to be true. So what's the takeaway from this? One, that people can do this successfully. Two, that people are waking up to critical issues of what's going on in our environment, with our food, with our governance, with our civil rights. And then one of the gems that I encourage people to take from this is that we are creating an electronic representation of the network of conscious activism that has emerged out of here. And I encourage people to keep those email lists, grow those email lists, because this is not the one and only thing that's going to come down the pike like that. Not only are there the so-called pests and the so-called weeds, but as we look around the country now, we're seeing more and more in terms of mandatory vaccines and out-of-control surveillance, implantable ID chips, aerosol pollution in the form of chemtrails, irradiated and genetically modified foods. There are a lot of programs that will have very nasty effects on us unless we wake up to what's going on and insist on our rights to safety, to privacy, and to representing ourselves in the government. So I also want to make note that as great as this news is, that they're not going to dump these pesticides on our heads out of airplanes, that it seems to be a temporary fix for political reasons. I think the government agencies behind this came to the realization that if they actually tried to spray, not only would the politicians lose favor, but that they would have a revolution in the streets. There were over 30 cities and counties that have passed resolutions against this spray, and that represented over 2.1 million people. And even these agencies do not want all of those people activated against them. So now with the current plan, they're still planning on dropping 20 million sterile moths a day out of these airplanes. Talk about upsetting an ecological balance. That's never been tested. They claimed that that this was, in the nick of time, a brand new scientific breakthrough. Well, they've been working on this for years. The evidence is that they're not even going to have this tested till 2009, possibly as late as 2011. And frankly, I was sad to see that they couldn't simply acknowledge that the citizen activism had affected their decision. Now, they wouldn't have even needed to say, well, we were concerned that there would be a revolution, so we stopped this thing. The news release I would have loved to have heard is something like, we're happy to announce today that due to thousands of people coming forward and volunteering their time to research the environmental, the medical, the economic, the health aspects of this, a lot of new research has come to light about the lack of damage, about the health impacts, about healthy alternatives in terms of agriculture that can mitigate any potential risk of this type of pest. And in light of that, we're actually not only calling off this plan, but we're devoting much of the money that was going to go toward this now unnecessary and unsafe eradication, and we're going to use that to help subsidize and support any farmers who would like to now take the opportunity to transition back to healthy, natural, balanced, organic farming processes. One other aspect that I wanted to mention is that even though they've stopped the aerial spray over urban areas, they're still planning on spraying over agricultural areas and over so-called forested areas. So I haven't seen any definition yet of what an urban area means. I live in a forested area. There are many houses around, but there's also a lot of trees. I know that many people in forested communities that I know of are very concerned that they're going to continue to do this spray. And I would be very concerned as a farmer as to whether or not I was going to have the choice of spraying my fields or not. So then, what does this all mean to them, to the people who are actually doing this program? Because they have not given up on this program or the money that comes with it. If we look carefully, the CDFA and the USDA has not reclassified the moth. They have not dropped the quarantines. They've not acknowledged the health risks, the environmental risks, the economic risks and damages that have already happened and that could happen. They have not acknowledged that there was no emergency, and they haven't acknowledged that this eradication is impossible. Numerous scientists have said it. We've looked into eradication in the state of California for so-called pests. There have been 274 of them on 12 different insects. None of them have succeeded. So it's important that we know that they're, number one, continuing to try to eradicate, and that it's clearly impossible. So that can trigger us to look more deeply and say, well, what is the motivation if it's not eradication? So they have admitted that there is no crop damage. And we need to hold them to presenting hard evidence of crop damage, of economic damage, even in any other country, because the information that they have been relying on was from 1993, 94, and before, and that's when they were using, for instance, in Australia and New Zealand, the old organophosphate pesticides, which wiped out the predators and threw the moth population out of balance. Once that happened and they realized it and they restored the balance by stopping using those those pesticides, the moths went back into balance. And in no country where they exist and have for more than 100 years, Australia, New Zealand, Hawaii, the UK, in none of those countries is this considered even to be a serious pest. So that's when we need to stop and look a little deeper and ask ourselves, well, then what's really going on? What are the motivations that are behind all of this? So we need to note that the CDFA is still talking about eradication, and they're still talking about toxicity tests. They're still talking about using truck foggers. So they'll be going through our neighborhoods and just spraying poison into the neighborhoods. They're talking about putting permethrin on telephone poles by the thousands per square mile. They're talking still about using twist ties, which numerous people that I know have had bad reactions and even getting close to. So one of the key distinctions that we need to learn to make is, rather than just aerial spraying, as if the planes themselves were the problem, is to be able to talk in terms of chemical exposure. I mean, if I walked into your living room while you had some friends gathered there and I whipped out a can of Raid and started spraying it around on you and on your living room, you wouldn't want that to happen unless you gave me permission for some reason that you had. And in this situation, we need to keep remembering that we have an inalienable right, and supported by our state and federal constitution, to safety, to privacy, to our health, to a healthy lifestyle. And that's been taken away. And the people who did that have performed a medical experiment without our consent. These are untested chemicals. There was no permission given. And so these people are liable and should be tried, and if found guilty, they should be incarcerated and or fined for risking other people's health and damaging people's health in this way. So we need to learn to think in terms of not being exposed to toxic chemicals without individual consent. It's unnecessary. If we follow the causes back upstream, we can find healthy ways of balancing things that don't need the pesticides, that don't need the herbicides. Despite all of the data that citizens have brought forward and all of the clearly viable perspectives for healthy alternatives to this treatment program, clearly the government is going ahead with every other aspect of the program except the aerial spraying. So it sure makes me wonder, well, why would that be? And we can't necessarily know definitively. That most of it would be speculation. But what we can do is just assemble the facts along the line of thinking of, well, who benefits from this and who loses? So let's just take a look at who benefits and then see if a story starts to emerge. Well, first of all, clearly Stuart Resnick benefits from this. The man who now has his nut and citrus orchards sprayed for free, and who owns the company that is providing the Checkmate spray, and would have benefited to the hundreds of millions of dollars from this program. Also, Dynamic Aviation, the company that does reconnaissance for the CIA, was going to do the spray flights. I'm quite confident will probably now be doing the sterile moth release flights, because that's something that they have trained themselves for. The CDFA gets to keep their money flowing that they're getting through the USDA from Homeland Security. So all three of those agencies get to have a large budget coming through. They get to have their shiny new trucks, their salaries, and get to have clout in their community that they've got a quote successful, well-funded program going. We keep going behind that, and the big chemical companies obviously keep benefiting from our using these chemicals for unnecessary control measures like this. And the big agricultural companies get to benefit from this by increased control. The organic farmers and the local independent farmers are literally being bankrupted by even needing to deal with the red tape of this, much less by having their products actually sprayed with things that discerning eaters know aren't really going to be organic. So it's useful to be suspicious of whether or not the benefit to big agricultural companies by diminishing the market for the organic products. And Santa Cruz and Monterey is really the epicenter of organic farming nationwide, and they're being crippled by these efforts. And then if you look even behind those big corporations, we have to wonder about what I call the controllers themselves, the people who are using large corporations, using oil, using food to control people and to control money in order to control people. If we trace back the agricultural roots of this whole program, we didn't used to need oil in order to farm, maybe in your tractor, but not on your soil, not on your plants, not on your insects. And then the Rockefeller Foundation, in cooperation with Monsanto and DuPont and a number of the other big chemical companies, began creating agribusiness. And very clearly, it's well documented that they set out to control agriculture, food worldwide, the same way they currently controlled oil. So the strategy was to convert the growing of food to a petroleum-based endeavor. And when Henry Kissinger was working as an advisor to Nixon in the early 70s, Nixon put him in charge of food strategy worldwide. And he set out a program to learn to use food as a weapon. And he said at the time, publicly, he said, if you control oil, you control nations. If you control food, you can control the people. So that's a little look. We could go a lot deeper on who actually benefits. But if we look to see who loses, first and foremost, it's the people. Each one of us is going to lose we're losing our constitutional rights. We're losing a sense of power in our society, of having honest interactions with our government where we can have an effect. People are getting sick. People are under stress. Their privacy is being invaded. The economic well-being of many, many businesses will still be impacted, even with ground spraying. If we start, if these truck foggers start going through our neighborhoods, and ultimately the taxes on tourists, it goes in many communities to support their social services. And as well, our food is affected, our water is affected, and now it's like the third realm of our environment. Even our air is being impacted. And if you trace some of this back even further, there are other agendas going on which are now being documented. They've been well documented for some time. But Germany has just come out recently acknowledging that they are in fact chemtrailing. They're doing this aerosol pollution with bacteria, heavy metals, and so forth for various reasons, which they won't state. They're now acknowledging that they're doing it. The U.S. government hasn't acknowledged yet, even though there's been numerous studies of what's coming down out of the air after these planes leave these trails of chemicals, So essentially what's happening is our entire atmosphere is being polluted. As nasty as this aerial spray would have been, and as nasty as these local programs of tree splatting and twist ties and truck fogging are, if we look back to what the same powers that be are up to, they're actually doing the entire atmosphere of the planet, especially over the developed areas. So again, one of the most effective things that we can take away from this is that as we're becoming more aware, as we're waking up and interconnecting with each other, we can use these electronic lists and use the organizational tools that we're developing to bring the truth out, just to educate the public and take a stand and say no to any of these efforts which infringe on our rights. In addition, in terms of who loses, obviously the birds that were dying, the bees that were dying, organic farming, and ultimately even the U.S. government itself. Even though they may think they're getting short-term benefit from this program in various ways, clearly the credibility of our elected representatives and the bureaucrats that they have put into place has been seriously undermined. And this could be an opportunity to take a path of restoring that confidence, or they can continue going in the direction of undermining it. And the more they refuse to actually take caring oversight about our health and the environment, the more we'll have the opportunity to discover whatever agendas are causing this sort of unsafe, unnecessary, ineffective, and illegal measures. If we stop and first just simply celebrate the turning of the tide on this, to celebrate the success of the human spirit joining with one another and standing up for ourselves, and then look and see, well, okay, what's still going on? And then look and see, well, why is that going on? Ultimately, hopefully, that leads us to, given all of that, what are the actions to continue to take? Because the worst outcome would be if this small victory encouraged people to just go back to sleep or not pay attention to what else is going on. That would be a real misunderstanding of this situation. So I've been talking with many people and just asking myself, what are still the most highly leveraged actions that are viable and needed? And it really starts for me with continuing to press for reclassification of the pest, because I shouldn't even call it a pest. It's an insect that isn't causing any harm. So if it simply gets reclassified, then all of this goes away. The trade wars go away. The lawsuits go away. The stress for the farmers, the potential for illness, it simply disappears. Secondly, to insist that the CDFA produces hard data to justify the quarantine and any projected economic losses that they're using to support the need for going forward with this program at all. And if the LBAM were to ever become a problem, we can simply use the best practices agriculturally from New Zealand that Dr. Harder and Jeff Rosendale learned a lot about when they went over there to check it out. Next, and probably at the core of it all for me, is to remember our constitutional rights. Our country was set up on the premise that nobody gets to harm someone else without their permission. And these agencies don't have our permission to expose us to chemicals. And that's right there in our Constitution. So if they do, it's illegal. And I strongly encourage all of the lawsuits that are being formed or have been filed continue to go forward for the sake of this particular moth program, but for the sake of any program in the future that's coming our way to violate our constitutional rights. Next is to encourage the same cities and counties that have come together in this coalition and passed over 30 resolutions against the spray to revise their resolutions. Any ones that weren't strong enough already should go back and look and see, are you willing to include any spray of any private property without the owner's permission? Because the truth is that these chemicals, in 99% of the cases, are not necessary if we simply look to nature and see, how do we rebalance what we usually threw out of balance? Secondly, to encourage those same cities to create city ordinances, as have been done in over 100 cases now, mostly in cities on the East Coast, ordinances that reclaim the rights of local communities to protect themselves. It was early on in our governmental history, it was strongly honored that a government far away is not going to know what's best for a local community. And so there are more and more cities which are creating ordinances particularly to undermine the usurped power of corporations to come in and pollute their environments with either radiation or chemicals pollution in the water, pollution in the air, and so forth. And they are being very effective. And since we already have this coalition, it would be an easy next step to just have entire cities and counties reclaim our rights. I also think it's a great idea to have those cities and counties be responsible for employing their police and sheriff's departments to protect their citizens. That's what they're there for. We're being attacked. We're being poisoned. And that's not okay. And these city governments have validated that. And they should be using the police to protect us. Another one that there's more and more talk of now that seems to be gathering momentum is creating a statewide initiative to institute the precautionary principle. Hopefully soon a nationwide initiative. They're already doing it in Europe, but the precautionary principle is simply the principle that anyone with an intent to expose any other human being to anything that might put their health at risk has the obligation to demonstrate beyond any doubt that it would be safe to do that. In addition, of course, to getting their permission, because it's their rights not to be exposed to anything against their permission. The next thing I would suggest that we focus on is petitions to terminate the public officials who have been responsible for this program. It's at the very least irresponsible, if not criminal activity, and they should be at least terminated, if not incarcerated, for damaging people's health, for damaging the environment, and as an example for future politicians or bureaucrats who might take it into their minds to go around an environmental impact report, to declare a false state of emergency, to spray people with unnecessary and unsafe chemicals. In addition, I would like to see the attorneys go after the sound knowledge of where these emergency powers came from. I don't remember that happening. I wasn't asked about that. To find out, because the USDA originally was created as a quasi-governmental organization by Roosevelt when the government, he felt, did not have enough money or time to handle things like agriculture and transportation. So they set up some sort of independent agencies that would then handle those things in partnership with the government. Meanwhile, they've gotten out of hand, so they're not even elected representatives that we can recall who are arbitrarily sitting down at their desk one day and making a decision, okay, we're just going to go ahead and spray 7 million people without asking them with toxic chemicals. So we should relook at that and get rid of those emergency powers. Already, I have learned that there's a new initiative underway to change the way pesticides are used around people. That there's a constitutional amendment being considered that prohibits the use of pesticides within 1,000 feet of any person or residence without their written permission. And then I don't have the details of this worked out, but I strongly suggest that as the community of Northern California that we spearhead an effort to have at least 50% representation of citizens on any decision-making body that is going to make policy that is going to impact us, so that we get to choose our own scientists and our own doctors and our own lawyers and our own ecologists and citizen activists who actually have our best interests in mind, and to be able to sit down on these working groups, these task forces with the government-appointed so-called independent or third party that frankly the people don't trust anymore. So it would follow the principle that anyone impacted by a decision or a policy gets to participate in the creation of that policy. There's a quote from Steve Lyle, who's the public relations guy for the CDFA, right in the beginning when people started questioning and resisting the notion of being sprayed from airplanes with poisons. He came out and he said publicly, there is no vote. The state has the power. I think that's the kind of statement that we need to become very sensitive to. That's the kind of statement you might have heard out of Germany or Russia or Italy during the birth of their totalitarian phases. Again, any time that we're not included in a decision that affects us, the people should take note and stand up and remember that the government agencies and their appointees are supposed to be working for us. We hired them to take care of our health. So when we hear a statement like that, we need to stand up by the hundreds and thousands and millions and say, no, the people have the power, and unless you act in ways that protect them, we'll get rid of you or your policies, and we'll institute ones that actually can work for everyone, not just for big business. There's another quote that really struck me that I saw in an article from Secretary Kawamura himself, where he said, when we forget the stable foundation upon which agriculture must stand, we do so not at our own peril, but at the peril of civilization itself. Well, I think that's actually a pretty good quote. I think it's at our individual peril as well as the peril of civilization, but I think it's useful to see what he actually said rather than what he meant. When he says, when we forget the stable foundation upon which agriculture must stand, well, what is that? That's a conversation worth having, because when we follow back the cascade of agricultural problems, back behind the pesticides and the herbicides and the fertilizers, and get back to, well, oh, wait a minute, where did this go out of balance in the first place? It was when we started planting just one crop and trying to kill the soil, kill the air, and pollute the water around it in order that that one crop could somehow be more productive. And it turns out that even though that was successful for a while, because you're going to get more produce if you produce only one crop, as far as you can see, for a little while you're going to get more production. But meanwhile, if you look at it, nature doesn't do that. So there's a balance that's been thrown off that then demands all these chemicals in order to try to fight the symptoms of that imbalance. So for me, the best news of this whole fiasco has been that when I follow these streams all the way up to the headwaters, I find two things at the headwaters. One is the individual rights, which we've talked about already, the individual rights of each person to not have their safety and privacy violated. The other is the balance of nature. So if we simply keep always going back to the balance of nature and ask ourselves, okay, how can we learn from what some of the local organic growers call the wisdom of place? What is nature telling us about how to be in balance with that? And this has been proven scientifically, even with LBAM. A research scientist named Nicola Irvin, originally from University of California, Davis, now at Riverside, went to New Zealand and did a study in the orchards, specifically with LBAM, to see what it took to restore a natural balance. And she simply did intercropping, which is where, in her study, every 9th row in the orchards, they replanted certain native plants, and those native plants supported the natural predators that then took care of the rebalancing the insects, and after that, the LBAM was not a problem. So it's been scientifically proven even recently. So that's a hint at the going back to the diversity of nature. And still a lot of people think that they've gotten so used to chemical agriculture that they think it's just part of what we need to do. And a lot of people think, well, the Green Revolution's got its problems, but look, boy, it's what we need to feed the world. Well, it turns out that it's not. It's been proven by numerous researchers, and then finally the most comprehensive study ever done on this came out in April, and I want to get the name right so people can track this down themselves. The International Assessment of Agricultural Science and Technology for Development. Google IAASTD. And they came out on April 15th with a report. 400 scientists spent 4 years producing a 2,500-page report appraising global agriculture, and particularly looking into the Green Revolution and genetically modified food, and came to the conclusion, and in fact it was spearheaded by a former member of the World Bank, so this is not some bizarre, radical group doing this, and they came to the conclusion that the answer to the failure of the Green Revolution is to go back to small-scale organic farms. So once again, it's just recognizing that nature is teaching us the whole time how to be safe, how to be healthy, how to have plenty of food to eat, if we're just willing to pay attention and then take a stand as citizens for what would actually incorporate that into a sustainable, safe, caring society. So the last thing I would like to say is just to salute our amazing culture in Northern California and all of the individuals who paid attention to what was going on in this LBAM situation and took time out of your busy lives and stood up and sought out the truth and then took a stand for what you knew to be healthy and safe and sustainable. And I want to encourage you to celebrate, to take a well-needed break, heal, and then go back to creating the systems that can continue to rebuild a healthy agriculture and a healthy relationship with the government, that so that we can stop what's unsafe, what's unnecessary, what's ineffective, what's illegal, and we can return to, or perhaps create for the first time really, a culture that regards individual rights primarily and only does whatever they do democratically after the regarding of individual rights. And secondly, restores a healthy agriculture, honoring what nature is showing us is sustainable. And finally, treasuring your email list, treasuring the friendships that you've made with other people and other networks who care about social justice, care about the environment, care about people's health enough to stand up for it, because we'll need these in the future. It's a great way of meeting like-minded people, and it's the most effective way I know to be active in the movements that will be needed as we go forward.